Hello everyone, I'm Dan Hope, he's Andy Anders. New thing we're going to do here with football season starting called press coverage, where we're going to give some instant analysis after press conferences, games, whatnot here on the 11 Warriors YouTube channel. And we thought today would be a good time to start because we thought that there was a good chance that Ryan Day would name a starting quarterback today. But as it turned out, Andy, still no quarterback decision, and it certainly is sounding more and more like we are going to see both quarterbacks play early in the season.
Yeah, Day said there's still a chance it could work itself out this week, but once they get into Indiana game prep next week, you got to start preparing for Indiana. You got to start coming up with a concrete game plan. So I would say if it's not decided by next Monday, and I wouldn't put the odds at better than 50% of that happening, just based off the comments we heard today, then Ohio State will have two quarterbacks rolling in against the Hoosiers.
The obvious concern a lot of people have is you think back to 2015 when there was a similar situation with Cardale Jones and JT Barrett, and Urban Meyer didn't name a quarterback going into the season. We actually didn't know until lidderally Cardale Jones ran onto the field for the first drive of that game who the starting quarterback would be. And then the offense was pretty disjointed all year long because it was like they didn't have that one guy. And I think that's the concern a lot of people have now when you look at the situation between Kyle McCord and Devin Brown is, are we going to have a repeat of that? Now, the good news is, I think based on what Ryan Day said today, it seems like he's a lot more optimistic about the quarterbacks than they were at this time 1 week ago. Last week he was saying we're really looking for someone to step up. Today, it seemed like Ryan Day felt like both of these guys are starting caliber. He's just not ready to make a decision between them yet.
Yes, and that's the sense we got. He said he took a straw poll of the staff, and it was almost even as to who should start against Indiana. I think the interesting thing to note here about 2015 is there was a lot of other extenuating circumstances that went into making that offense forward. You talked about some concerns in terms of who was coordinating it after Tom Herman left. And also, I think that these two quarterbacks, no offense to JT or Cardale, they were both great in their respective, eras for Ohio State. Both come in with a higher recruiting pedigree. Both are under a coach and come from a system that has produced 3 consecutive first-round draft picks at the position. So those kind of maybe take back your concerns a little bit as a fan, but it's definitely suboptimal not to have a starter going into week 1.
The other thing that I think plays a factor in this is the fact that Ohio State starts the season with Indiana, Youngstown State, Western Kentucky. Mm-hmm. Those should be 3 easy wins for Ohio State. So that gives Ohio State a little bit more time to experiment with this. I think when you think ahead to week 4, Notre Dame, I think by that point, Ohio State really does need to have a firm starting quarterback. But it doesn't necessarily have to for those first 3 games because you would think either one of those guys should be perfectly capable of leading Ohio State to victories in those games.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, kind of moving off the quarterbacks a little bit, and that will obviously be a situation that plays out here in the coming weeks. Day talked about too today, starters on the offensive line, and seems to be a little more set in stone there, and that's good when you have an uncertain quarterback situation, right? You need guys. He was beaming about Josh Simmons, not Jimmy, as he corrected in his presser today. Josh Simmons, he was beaming about and felt like his ceiling is really high for the team, just needs to get into place. Carson Hinzman is the leader at center, as we've expected, as we've talked about on the podcast. And then at right tackle, you have Josh Fryar will start there, but he talked up Luke Montgomery a lot as a freshman, kind of taking on that role and proving that he is ready to play in his first season in Columbus.
Yeah, he's definitely, they're definitely really high on Luke Montgomery. Definitely good to know now that it is Josh Simmons, so we could start going back and forth on that one. But it does seem like they found a front 5 they feel pretty good about. Second week in a row that we heard Ryan Day speak with a lot of optimism when talking about the offensive line. And so I think that's certainly a good sign, considering that's the position, maybe even more so than quarterback, that I think there's been a lot of concerns about this offseason. It does seem like they have a front 5 they feel pretty good about there. Again, could have some opportunity to experiment, but it does feel there like, okay, they have a starting 5 now that's going to probably be that starting 5 going into that first game in Bloomington next week. Also, on the defensive side of the ball, interestingly today, I asked Jim Knowles about who's in line to be those starting safeties, and he was very definitive. Sonny Styles is going to be a starting safety for this Ohio State defense. I know that's music to a lot of fans' ears out there, but the other safety spot, we saw Jihad Carter leading the way at the start of camp, but Jim Knowles said today that Jihad's been a little bit banged up, and there's still a freeway competition there between Jihad Carter, Josh Proctor, who we saw take most of the first team reps during the spring, and perhaps the most interesting name in there, Malik Hartford, the true freshman, has we've heard a lot of good things about him this offseason, and he has done enough to put himself in that competition where there's at least a chance he could end up being a starting free safety this season.
Yeah, you talk about there were 6 guys in front of him entering spring. He's passed 1 or 2 of them, and I think what's really interesting, going back to Sonny at that starting role, is since they've moved him down to nickel. Knowles was talking today about it's going to be different than it looked last year with McAllister, with Sonny at nickel, because there's more you can do with him. He's such an explosive and rangy athlete. They feel comfortable with him in man. They feel comfortable with him in zone. They feel comfortable with him blitzing off the edge. So it seems like Sonny is really going to be the piece that kind of makes this entire safety rotation work the way Knowles was describing it today, because of all the different things he can do and problems he can present for an offense.
Thanks for joining us here on Press Coverage. Go to 11warriors.com for all of our coverage of Ohio State football as we get ready for the season to open next week.